That night's rain fell over the Denver streets, as if the sky itself were witnessing a tragedy no one yet understood. And then Brandon Hayes saw her, a thin figure curled beneath a flickering billboard, trembling as if a single gust could erase her from the world. He slammed the brakes so hard the car skidded across the wet pavement, his heart pounding, not from fear but from the impossible realization. Before him, the woman was Lauren. 3 years without a single message, 3 years gone, as if she had never existed, 3 years leaving him and their little boy, Evan, with a hollow ache time could never fill. And now she was here. Not the radiant, youthful woman who had stood beside him on their wedding day, but a fading soul on a freezing Colorado night. Brandon threw open the door, the rain striking his face as if trying to awaken memories he had buried deep. He ran toward her, water seeping into his shoes. But he didn't care. Each step tightened something in his chest until he could barely breathe. Lauren was lying on her side, her thin shirt plastered to her frail body. Her tangled hair soaked her hands, pale with cold. When her eyes lifted, her gaze cut into him like a dull blade filled with fear and despair. Lauren Brandon breathed his voice breaking in the rain. Her reaction shattered him. She recoiled, her shoulders shaking violently. No, please don't. She was afraid of him, afraid of the one person who had loved her most in this world. That moment wounded Brandon deeper than any accusation could have. He knelt, raising both hands, as if afraid to frighten her further. "It's me, Brandon." Rain poured down, as if trying to wash everything away, but it could not erase the emptiness in her eyes. For a fleeting second, he saw the woman who had once been his entire world, now reduced to a lost, abandoned child in the storm. Lauren parted her lips, trying to speak, but only weak breaths escaped. Then she collapsed. Her entire body fell into his arms, shockingly light, so light it terrified him to imagine what she had endured. He lifted her and ran toward the car, the rain striking him like a brutal reminder that Lauren had not simply returned, she was fighting to survive. Inside, she slumped against the seat, her face pale, her lips cracked. Brandon turned the heater to full, his hands shaking as he wrapped his coat around her. She did not look at him, only stared blankly ahead, her eyes hollow as if the world had cast her aside long ago. "What happened to you, Brandon?" whispered. But Lauren gave no answer. The car sped through the storm, leaving behind the image of a man clinging desperately to the most precious thing in his life, while it felt like it was slipping from his grasp. On the drive home, memories flooded him the moment she left. Without explanation, the nights Evan asked where his mother was, the times Brandon almost called her, but hung up in anger, the mornings he woke to realize he had been alone for too long. But the thought that suffocated him most was the question he could not escape: what could have forced Lauren to disappear until she became this? When the gates opened, Brandon glanced at her. She was staring at their home, a warm, spacious, brightly lit house, with the look of someone gazing at a world that no longer belonged to her. The light reflected off her exhausted face, and the sight pained him so sharply he had to grit his teeth. She had once stood here, laughing, singing, holding Evan in her arms, yet now even seeing the house made her tremble. Brandon stepped out, opened her door and carried her inside. Lauren whispered, her voice so faint it nearly vanished. "Don't let Evan see me, please." Brandon froze. A mother who loved her child that deeply, why would she leave him? And the more agonizing question, what horror had driven her to abandon her own son? Lauren closed her eyes, rain mixing with her tears. Brandon tightened his grip on her trembling shoulders, a silent promise forming in his heart. Whatever you have been through, I will find out. In the vast house, the rain beat against the windows like a relentless drum, announcing an unavoidable and painful journey ahead. And Brandon knew tonight was only the beginning. Lauren had returned, but whatever had been chasing her for 3 long years, it was likely close behind. Brandon laid Lauren on the wide guest room bed, the soft golden light falling across her hollow face, turning once familiar features into something heartbreakingly distant. She lay there trembling in small waves, as if any sound could make her jump up and run. He pulled a blanket over her shoulders while calling their private doctor, his voice shaking despite every effort to stay composed. By the time Dr. Mitchell arrived, Lauren no longer had the strength to sit up. The woman in her early 50s, sharp-eyed yet gentle-touched Lauren's wrist to check her pulse, then cast Brandon a look filled with unspoken warning. Weak pulse, low blood pressure, a body in dangerous condition. But what worried her more was Lauren's eyes, wide and darting like a trapped animal, then suddenly empty and lost as if she no longer recognized the world around her. When the IV needle pricked her skin, Lauren jolted her arm, recoiling in pure instinct. "No, please, don't." Dr. Mitchell paused, her voice as light as a breeze. "It is all right, Lauren. You are safe. No one is going to hurt you." But the reassurance could not reach the deepest layer of her fear. Brandon stood in the corner, feeling something squeeze the air out of his lungs. This was the woman who had once been strong, vibrant. The one who would stand up for others without hesitation, now reduced to a trembling shadow, haunted by something unseen. When the examination ended, and the doctor signaled for him to step outside, they stood in the hallway, with only a half-open door between them and Lauren. Brandon the doctor said quietly, her voice heavy as stone. "She is not just physically exhausted. This is long-term trauma with signs of post-traumatic stress. She has lived in fear for years." Heat surged through Brandon's face. "But why? What could make her live like that?" The doctor let out a long breath. "I do not have enough information yet, but it is clear she has been pushed to the edge. If you want to help her, you must be patient. You cannot force her to remember. You cannot confront her fears head on." And the fact that she left Brandon asked his voice, grinding like a whetstone. Evan cried for months when she did not come back. Mitchell looked him directly in the eyes. "Brandon, the woman lying in that room, is not the one who left 3 years ago. She is a damaged version of herself you have never met. And you must accept that she may have been driven to believe leaving you and your son was the only way to protect both of you." A cold shiver ran down Brandon's spine. He glanced back at the cracked door, at Lauren's silhouette blurred under the warm light. Helplessness washed over him, the helplessness of a father who had fought to stay strong for 3 years, a man who tried rebuilding his life, but could never escape the emptiness of a broken family. Now that Lauren had returned, every unhealed wound throbbed painfully again. After the doctor left, Brandon stepped back into the room. Lauren was lying on her side, with her eyes half open, staring at the ceiling, as if trying to glue together shattered memories. The moment she heard him enter, she flinched. "I will leave," she whispered, barely audible. "I cannot stay. I am not supposed to be here." Brandon walked closer, speaking in the same low, gentle tone he used to soothe Evan to sleep. "Lauren, you are safe." "No." She shook her head, her breathing quick and shallow. Nowhere is safe. Brandon sat on the edge of the bed, keeping enough distance not to frighten her. Who do you think will come for you? Lauren clutched the blanket, her lips trembling, though no words came. He did not push her, only waited. She turned away, but when she finally spoke, her voice cracked like shattered glass. If they know I am alive, they will come back. Brandon's heartbeat slammed into his ribs. Who are they? But Lauren squeezed her eyes shut, tears slipping from the corners. Do not make me say it. Please, his hands curled into fists as he fought between anger for the 3 years she abandoned him and the ache he felt for the trembling woman before him. All right. I won't ask again. With that single sentence, Lauren released a breath, as if a chain had been removed from her throat. Brandon lifted the blanket higher over her shoulders, feeling them quiver under his touch. He stood, but before he could take a step, she whispered, barely conscious, Evan, my son, is he all right? Brandon turned his voice the softest it had been in 3 long years. He is all right. He is growing fast. He misses you. Lauren covered her face as her whole body folded inward under the weight of guilt. Brandon stepped out, closing the door gently so it would not startle her again. He walked down the long hallway, each step carrying the weight of 3 years of pain and unanswered questions. In his office, he turned on the desk lamp and wrote a single name on a sticky note, Richard Cole, the only investigator he trusted. There was no time to waste. He would not let Lauren sink back into darkness. Brandon called immediately, his voice low and hardened like heated steel. Richard, I need to see you. This is urgent. After a few seconds of silence, the man on the other end replied, Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, my office. Brandon set the phone down and stared out the rain-streaked window. The storm had passed, yet the wind still carried heavy warning sounds around the house, as if reminding him that whatever hunted Lauren for 3 years might still be out there. And as Brandon looked toward the dark hallway leading to her room, he knew one thing for certain: the fight to reclaim peace for her and for their family had only just begun. The next morning, as the first light filtered through the curtains, Brandon's house remained heavy and quiet, as if the darkness from the night before had refused to leave. Lauren was still asleep, her breathing steady yet fragile, while Brandon had been awake for a long time, standing at her door, listening to every small sound, afraid that if he stepped away for too long, she might disappear from his life again. When it was finally time to meet Richard, he closed her door softly so she would not wake, then headed to the garage and drove his black SUV through Denver's silent streets. Richard Cole's investigation office sat inside an old brick building where the scent of strong coffee blended with old paper. Richard, a man in his early 50s with a salt and pepper beard and the sharp eyes of a former detective who had seen everything life could throw at a person, stood when Brandon entered. "You look terrible," he said in his rough, steady voice, as if he had expected this moment for a long time. Brandon did not deny it. He placed his car keys on the desk and said, "She came back." A long silence followed. Richard nodded once. Lauren, yes. "What condition is she in?" Brandon breathed deeply, trying to keep his voice stable. "Bad. Very bad. She is exhausted, unstable, terrified." And he paused. She said, "If someone finds out she is still alive, they will come back." Richard flipped open his notebook, tapping his pen lightly on the page. "Did she say who she cannot say? Or she is too afraid to?" Richard raised a brow, his expression tightening. "Do you think it could be connected to your family?" "No," Brandon answered immediately, then hesitated. I do not think so." Richard studied him as if trying to see deeper than Brandon was willing to reveal. "Where do I start?" Brandon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small sticky note. "I found something last night in the old house, a backup drive from the security cameras. The date on it was 3 days before Lauren disappeared." Richard reached for it, but Brandon held on to it a moment longer than necessary, as if handing it over meant facing a truth he was not ready for. "I have not watched all of it," Brandon said, voice low. "I am afraid it will be worse than I imagined." Richard nodded slowly, careful, as if holding out the most important piece of a buried case. "I will look, but you need to prepare yourself for anything." Brandon exhaled, eyes drifting to the window, where sunlight cut across floating dust. "I just want to know the truth. Whatever it is." When he left the office, his chest felt heavier. The image of Lauren collapsing into his arms in the rain replayed in his mind like a wound that refused to close. He did not know what awaited him, but deep down he understood that today was only the beginning of a series of truths powerful enough to destroy everything. When he returned home, he heard the faint clink of a spoon against a bowl in the kitchen. Lauren was sitting at the bar counter, wrapped in the sweater he had left out for her, her hand trembling slightly as she lifted the spoon. Sunlight softened her face, making her look less pale than the night before, but the fear in her grey-blue eyes was unchanged. When she noticed him, she startled her hand, bracing against the counter, as if preparing to defend herself. Brandon stopped a few steps away, his voice soft yet filled with worry. "You are awake. How do you feel?" She lowered her head. "Okay. Somewhat. Can you eat a little?" Silence settled again, thick and cold like the first snow blanketing a path. Brandon looked at her, feeling a mixture of tenderness, sorrow, and pain. Lauren darted a glance toward the window, toward the road outside her eyes, sharp with fear, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. "Lauren," he said slowly, "no one knows you are here." She did not answer. Instead, she gripped the sleeve of the sweater, her voice barely audible, as if speaking only to herself. "They always find me." A chill ran down Brandon's spine. He had once thought she left because she no longer loved him, or because he had become too distant, too busy. But now, looking at the woman before him, a woman who was no longer the Lauren, he realized every assumption he had made was wrong. Very wrong. "Lauren," he asked gently, "who hurt you?" Her eyes filled with turmoil. "I cannot say. If I say it, everything will get worse." Brandon wanted to break the silence, wanted to pull her out of the nightmare that had haunted her for 3 years. But he remembered Dr. Mitchell's warning: no pressure, no forcing, no confrontation that could trigger her fear. He took a slow breath, keeping his voice steady. "Then just know one thing. I am not going anywhere, and I will protect you in every way I can." For the first time since last night, Lauren looked directly into his eyes. That gaze carried not only fear, but a question, a fragile hope, and a wound that had been bleeding for years. Why, she whispered, her voice trembling. Brandon swallowed and answered, "Because you are my family. No matter what happened." A single tear rolled down her cheek, as if his words had touched the part of her she had buried the deepest. Brandon stepped a little closer, though still keeping her safe space intact. "Evan will be home tonight," he said softly. "I want to tell you beforehand. I do not want you to be overwhelmed." Lauren froze, her fingers tightening until they turned white. I do not know how to face him." "It is all right," Brandon said. "We will take it slowly. But he will be afraid of me. He does not remember me anymore." Brandon held her gaze, his voice firm. Evan never stopped asking about his mother. Lauren's breath caught her emotions, overwhelming her. Her eyes blurred with tears, and with a choked sob she began to cry. Brandon wanted to go to her to hold her, but he restrained himself. He let her cry, let her release the pain she had carried alone for 3 years. He simply stood there, a silent guardian in her dark, chaotic world. When her tears slowly subsided, Brandon spoke again, quiet yet resolute. "I asked Richard to investigate. We will know the whole truth." Lauren looked up, tears still shining and trembling on her lashes. "Brandon, do not." "I have to." "No. Please." "What are you most afraid of, Lauren?" Her entire body trembled violently. "I am afraid the truth will kill you and Evan." Brandon stood motionless. For the first time since she returned, Lauren was not just afraid, she was desperate. And that desperation told him they were stepping into a battle whose enemy he could not yet see. "Whoever they are." Brandon said, his voice low and carved into the air itself. "I will find them. And I will not let them touch my family ever again." A flicker of something sparked in Lauren's eyes, fear mixed with faint, fragile hope. Outside the window, the wind swept through the pine trees, the rustling sound like a warning that the secrets buried for 3 years were beginning to surface. And Brandon understood one thing with absolute clarity. The road ahead would not be easy. But no matter what darkness awaited them, he would walk straight into it to reclaim the woman sitting before him and the family he once thought he had lost forever. That afternoon, Richard Cole called Brandon, his voice short, but carrying a weight so heavy that just hearing it made Brandon's hand tighten around the phone. "I watched the drive," Richard said. "You need to get here now." One sentence drained the blood from Brandon's body. All afternoon he had been tense as a wire, watching every step Lauren took inside the house, paying attention to every sound as if any noise could trigger her panic again. But this call, it signaled that the thing he feared most had finally begun to reveal itself. Brandon left the house under Lauren's anxious gaze. She stood at the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. "Where are you going?" Her voice barely a whisper. "I will be right back," Brandon reassured her, but she still gave a slight shake of her head, as if she knew that whatever he was about to hear would change everything. Richard's office was darker than usual, the desk lamp casting a narrow beam over scattered open folders. He stood in front of the computer screen, arms crossed, his look a strange mix of regret and warning. "Sit," Richard said, then pressed play. The footage appeared on the screen, the street in front of their old house, peaceful quiet, until a dark sedan entered the frame. It stopped beneath the tree's engine, running the street light only bright enough to show the silhouette of someone inside. Richard fast-forwarded. The same car returned day after day, always stopping for a few minutes before leaving. Surveillance, Richard said. Intentional. Not random. Brandon swallowed hard, his hands gripping the chair. The next video played. Lauren stepped out of the house, still healthy back then, carrying a purse, as if going grocery shopping. The same sedan slipped from its hiding spot and followed her slowly. Brandon's chest tightened, as though a cold hand were crushing his heart. And that was not the worst part. Richard opened the final clip. Shot from a camera facing the yard, grainy but clear enough. Lauren walked across the street under the harsh afternoon sun. Suddenly, the sedan shot forward from the opposite curb. It accelerated. No brakes, no hesitation. It aimed directly at Lauren. Brandon shot up from his chair, every muscle locking with shock. Lauren was thrown down onto the pavement hands, clutching her stomach, her mouth open, though the cameras captured no sound. He remembered the doctor telling him she had been in a traffic accident. But now he knew the truth. It was never an accident. "Wait," Richard said. "There is more." He zoomed in on the driver's side window. The footage was blurry, but when the driver reached for the gear shift, a glint of reflected light revealed a metal bracelet, and more importantly, a half-moon scar beside the thumb. Richard looked at Brandon, his voice cold as steel. "It was a woman, and you know exactly who has that scar." Brandon felt his heartbeat drop to his feet. He tried to speak, but his mouth would not move. Richard enlarged the image. The face was fuzzy but recognizable. Kelly Monroe, his trusted assistant for 5 years, the woman who had stayed by his side after Lauren disappeared, the woman who had shown kindness to Evan. "No," Brandon whispered, but the footage did not lie. Kelly had tried to kill Lauren. Richard pulled the monitor closer and played the final frames, the car speeding away, the camera catching part of the license plate. He had already run the number through the state registry. Owner Ethan Monroe, Kelly's brother. "This is worse than you think," Richard said. "This was planned." She watched Lauren for days, maybe even longer. Brandon leaned forward, elbows on knees, feeling the room tilt. For years he had believed Lauren left because she stopped loving him, because he was too busy, too distant, because life became too much. But now he knew the truth. She had left to save his life and their sons. And the person who pushed her into that nightmare, the person who shattered their family, had been standing right beside him. "What do I do?" Brandon asked, his voice nearly empty. Richard replied, "We confront her. But not yet. If Kelly suspects Lauren is home, she may get desperate. You have to act like you know nothing." "Meaning I still have to let Kelly near us, yes," Richard said firmly. "And we need her to expose herself." Brandon felt his chest tighten again. The woman who tried to kill Lauren 3 years ago, who forced her into a ghost-like existence, who tore their family apart, might walk into their home at any moment. He did not know if he could look her in the eyes without losing control, but he knew this game had to be played to the end. On the drive home, the cold wind slapped across Brandon's face through the cracked window, but even that could not clear the fog of shock in his mind. He drove like a ghost, the image of Lauren being struck, replaying endlessly, a tormenting loop he could not escape. When he entered the house, Lauren was curled up on the sofa, knees pulled close to her chest, the sweater covering her legs, her eyes wide with fear, as she looked at him, as if expecting bad news. What is it?" Brandon stopped in front of her, struggling to control his breathing while his heart thrashed inside him. "I saw it. What happened before you left?" Lauren lowered her head, shoulders tightening. "Brandon, please don't. It was never your fault," he said, voice catching. "Not once." Lauren looked up, her eyes shimmering. "If you knew the truth, you would regret letting me come back." Brandon sat beside her, close enough that she felt his presence, but not touching her. "I know who was following you. Who drove that car?" Lauren froze, lips trembling, her face draining of color. Do not say their name." Brandon swallowed the rising ache in his throat. "Lauren, you need to trust me. I will not let anyone touch you again." She covered her face, but he could still hear the strangled sobs breaking through her hands. "Brandon, they will kill you." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then from now on, we fight together." Lauren collapsed against the sofa, her whole body shaking, but for the first time since her return, she did not pull away from him. The darkest secrets had risen to the surface. And from that moment, Brandon knew. There was no turning back. There was only one path left, stepping into the shadows that had hunted Lauren for 3 long years, and ending it once and for all. Evan returned in the late afternoon, just as sunlight brushed the leaves in the backyard and painted the air in a peaceful golden hue, a sharp contrast to the storm raging inside Brandon's chest. The boy ran into the house with his backpack bouncing on his shoulders, chattering excitedly about his day with his grandmother, though Brandon barely caught a word. His attention was fixed on the hallway, where Lauren stood, half hidden, behind a partly open door, her eyes peeking out as if trying to recognize the child she hadn't dared believe she would ever see again. And then their eyes met. Just for a second. Yet that second made the entire world stop spinning for Brandon. Evan tilted his head, his wide, innocent eyes blinking with curiosity rather than fear. "Who is she?" he asked, his voice small and honest. Lauren froze. Brandon could see her hand trembling so much she could no longer grip the edge of her shirt. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out, as if her throat had been locked by 3 years of guilt. 3 years of running, 3 years of missing her child so deeply it hurt to breathe. Brandon gently walked to Evan and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Evan," he said softly, "this is Lauren. She is staying with us for a while." Evan looked at his mother, though he did not know she was his mother, with the pure curiosity of a child. "Is she sick?" he asked. Lauren held her breath, moisture gathering in her eyes, trembling like a drop ready to fall. Brandon answered for her. "She is just a little tired." Evan nodded, accepting the explanation with heartbreaking ease, then smiled at Lauren, a small, innocent smile that nearly made her collapse. She turned away sharply, one hand clutching her chest as if stabbed. Brandon wanted to shield her from that pain, but he stayed still, knowing that if he approached too quickly, she would shatter. When Evan ran upstairs to get his toys, Lauren stepped back into the living room, her body trembling like a leaf barely holding onto a branch. "Brandon," her voice was rough. "He did not recognize me. It is not your fault. I left him. I let him grow up without a mother." Brandon remained silent. Lauren gripping the arm of the chair so tightly it left red marks. "If I stay, if I get close to him, I will only hurt him more." "No," Brandon said immediately, a reflex drawn from the deepest part of him. "No, Lauren. He needs you, and you need him." "I will ruin everything." Lauren shook her head, tears spilling. "I am a danger to both of you. If they know I am here," Brandon gently took her wrist, not tight, just enough to pull her back from the spiral. "Lauren, you are not running anymore." Her hand was ice cold, but she did not pull away. That closeness, fragile as it was the first sign she was beginning to trust the safety he was trying to build around her. Later that night, after Evan fell asleep, Brandon sat alone in the living room, the warm lamplight illuminating the family photos on the wall. One picture showed Lauren holding baby Evan, her eyes radiant, Brandon's smile so bright he barely recognized himself. He had forgotten he was ever that happy. Soft footsteps sounded behind him. Lauren stood there, wrapped in the sweater he had given her. "You are still awake?" she asked. "Could not sleep." "Me neither." Silence stretched between them. Then Brandon looked at her and asked, gently but with steady resolve, "Lauren, I need to know one thing. Who threatened you?" Lauren did not answer. Her eyes drifted toward the stairs, as if she feared Evan might overhear. I cannot say. I am afraid they will hurt me. And Evan, she swallowed throat tight. Yes. Brandon rose to his feet and stepped closer, keeping the careful distance she still needed. Whoever it is, I will protect you both. But I need the truth. Lauren closed her eyes. The truth will kill us. Brandon opened his mouth to respond when the doorbell rang. Both of them jolted. Brandon signaled for Lauren to hide again. His heart pounded as he walked to the front door, palms damp, unsure if the worst was waiting outside. When he opened it, he saw a familiar face, smiling sweetly. Kelly Monroe. Kelly, the woman he now knew, was responsible, yet he had to pretend he knew nothing, Brandon Kelly said in her honeyed voice. I brought some soup. I heard someone is staying with you. Brandon forced his expression to stay calm, even as his entire body stiffened. Right, thank you. Come in. Kelly entered, her heels tapping sharply on the wooden floor. She glanced around the house, her gaze sweeping every corner like a radar. You did not say who it is. I am curious. She smiled, but beneath that smile was a subtle, needling scrutiny. Brandon felt his stomach twist. An old friend, he answered. Just needs a place for a few days. Kelly stared at him for a long moment before placing the basket on the counter. You are too kind, Brandon. But be careful. Not everyone deserves your kindness. The way she said it made every muscle in his back tense. The words carried an implication, a veiled threat wrapped in fake concern. Kelly wandered through the living room, adjusting her dress absent-mindedly, then paused in front of a family photo on the shelf, the one of Lauren holding Evan. Kelly stared at it so long that Brandon had to resist the urge to snatch it away. Ah, she murmured, Lauren. Kelly tilted her head, her eyes darkening in a way that sent ice through Brandon's veins. Interesting that she would come back after all these years. Brandon felt his heart plummet. You know Denver is small. Kelly shrugged lightly. Rumors travel fast. She was testing him, and he could not take the bait. She needs help, that is all. Kelly stepped closer, standing so near he could feel her breath on his shirt. Brandon, I have always told you some people should not come back. A cold shiver ran the length of his spine, especially when Kelly whispered, especially those who already hurt you once. She stepped back with a smile, as if she had said something harmless. But Brandon knew beneath that smile was the same threat that had chased Lauren out of their lives 3 years ago. The living room door creaked softly. Lauren stood there. Kelly turned. The two women faced each other, one trembling so hard her hands shook uncontrollably, one smiling a slow, chilling smile. Lauren Kelly said, her voice sweet as sugar and sharp as a needle. Long time no see. Lauren stood frozen. Brandon watched them, knowing this confrontation was no longer a shadow from the past. It had just stepped into the room, and now the real battle had begun. The air in the living room froze like a thick sheet of ice covering a Colorado lake in midwinter. Kelly and Lauren stood facing each other, neither moving, neither breathing deeply enough to break the suffocating tension gripping the room. Brandon could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, as if his body were warning him that the most dangerous thing he had ever feared was now standing right in front of him. Kelly tilted her head, her lips curling into a gentle smile, so artificial it sent chills down his spine. Lauren, look at you. You have changed so much. I almost did not recognize you. Lauren stepped back half a pace, her hand gripping the doorframe as if it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes never left Kelly the instinct of someone who had once seen the devil wearing a human face. I thought Lauren whispered, her voice trembling. I thought you had disappeared. Kelly raised a brow. Oh no, I am still here. Very close. Brandon saw Lauren's shoulders jerk, her breath breaking in uneven gasps. Kelly took another step forward, her movements calm, but carrying a deliberate threat. Brandon, she said softly as she turned toward him, her voice smooth as velvet. I am truly surprised to see her here. After all these years, I thought she would never dare come back. Enough, Brandon said, trying to keep his voice steady, even as anger surged through him. Kelly laughed lightly and looked at him again. I am only stating the truth. 3 years ago, she abandoned your son without a single explanation. And now she just shows up as if nothing ever happened. Lauren slipped into a state between fear and numbness. She wanted to defend herself, to speak, but her throat locked tight with memories of being thrown onto the pavement, memories of the car speeding toward her, memories of the cold gaze behind the steering wheel. Brandon moved to stand between them, and Kelly looked at the distance he placed like it was an insult. You are protecting her? Kelly asked, her voice far too calm, dangerously calm. She is not who you think she is. Brandon looked directly at Kelly, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before, contempt and caution. She is the mother of my son. Kelly's jaw twitched, her lips lifting in a smile that was both angry and bitter. Yes, the mother of your son. The woman who vanished and left you alone. And while she was gone, who stayed with you, who worked until 2 a.m. to help you finish your projects, who took Evan to school, who cared for you when you fell apart. Her voice rose, trembling with a twisted emotion Brandon had never recognized in her until this moment obsession. Lauren stepped back again, not because of Kelly, but because the fear inside her threatened to pull her back into the years she spent running. Brandon stepped toward Kelly, his voice cold. Kelly, I appreciate what you did back then, but that does not give you permission to speak to Lauren this way. Kelly laughed, the sound sharp, like shattering glass echoing through the still room. You are always too kind, Brandon, even to people who do not deserve it. Brandon clenched his fists. He knew Richard wanted him to stay calm so Kelly would reveal herself, but seeing Lauren trembling behind him made it harder than ever to restrain himself. Kelly noticed the change instantly, the way a predator senses weakness. She stepped closer, slow and deliberate. Do you know what angers me the most? She asked softly, eyes locked on Brandon. That after all these years, she only had to show up once, and everything I did became meaningless. Kelly, you need to leave. Brandon said, his voice tight as a pulled wire. Kelly stared at him, the smile fading completely from her face. Something is wrong, isn't it? She said, her eyes narrowing. You are different. You avoid looking at me. You stand between me and her. Brandon did not respond. Kelly slowly looked around the house, her gaze eventually pausing near the kitchen, where the small camera Richard installed hid in the shadows. She did not see it, but her instinct, sharpened from years of manipulation, sensed something off. She turned back, suspicion darkening her eyes. Brandon, what do you know? The air thickened. Lauren covered her mouth, her heart pounding hard enough to hurt. Brandon knew this moment would come, but he had not expected it so soon. Kelly smiled again, but the expression was brittle cracking at the edges, as something wild stirred behind it. Who told you? Who made you doubt me? Brandon stayed silent. Kelly's breathing changed. Her eyes sharpened, then shook with fury, then spiraled into something unhinged. It was her, wasn't it? Kelly hissed, pointing at Lauren. Lauren recoiled, pressing herself against the wall. She has always wanted to ruin me. Even disappearing was not enough. She still managed to do it. That Kelly Brandon shouted his voice so loud, even Lauren flinched. But Kelly only laughed, a jagged, broken sound. "So there is something going on," she said, her voice lowering into something dangerous. "And you do not trust me anymore." Brandon stared at her, then answered slow and cold, as a blade slicing open a wound. "I saw the video." Kelly froze. Her entire body stiffened like she had been struck by lightning. The silence stretched so long it pressed on the walls. Lauren held her breath, and Brandon's fists clenched at his sides. Kelly opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, as if she were searching for a way to escape her own skin. "What video?" she whispered, though she already knew. Brandon did not blink. "The camera at the old house. The day you disappeared. The day the car hit you." Lauren hugged herself tightly, trembling uncontrollably. Kelly looked at Brandon, then Lauren, then Brandon again. And finally, the smile that appeared on her face cracked like the first fracture in a mask that was about to crumble completely. "So you know," Kelly whispered, her voice empty. "Then why have you not called the police?" Brandon answered, his voice raw. "Because I wanted to hear the truth from your mouth." Kelly let out a distorted laugh. "The truth?" She gritted her teeth. "The truth is that I did everything because I love you." The room exploded in gasps, Lauren's breath hitching sharply and horror flashing across Brandon's face. Kelly stepped forward, eyes wild. "You were supposed to be mine. If she had not existed, if that pathetic love of yours had not gotten in the way, you would have been mine long ago." Brandon moved to shield Lauren. Kelly stopped, but Kelly did not stop. Tears streamed down her face, twisted with hatred. "If I cannot have you," she whispered like a curse, "then she cannot either." Brandon barely had time to react before the front door burst open. Richard Cole and 2 police officers stormed inside. "Kelly Monroe." Richard announced, his voice cold as a death sentence. "You are under arrest for assault, stalking, and attempted murder." Kelly spun around, staring at the gleaming handcuffs, and at last her expression shattered, collapsing like a building whose foundation had been ripped away. "Brandon," she whispered one final time, a plea already doomed. But Brandon did not look at her. As the officers led Kelly out the door, Lauren fell to her knees, her breath breaking apart. Brandon dropped beside her and pulled her into his arms without hesitation, and for the first time since her return, Lauren did not resist. She buried her face in his chest and sobbed as if 3 years of locked-away pain had finally found a place to escape. Brandon held her tightly, whispering, "You are safe now. I swear." But behind the relief in his eyes lingered a deeper fear, the fear that Kelly's arrest was only the first chapter of something far more dangerous. Because one question still hung in the silence, a question neither of them dared say aloud. Had Kelly acted alone, or was she only the first shadow in the darkness that had been closing in on Lauren all these years? After Kelly was taken away, the house fell into a silence so deep Brandon could hear the clock ticking 1 second at a time, as if even time itself was afraid to move through something so fragile. Lauren sat on the sofa with her hands clenched together, her body curled in on itself, as though she could still feel the poisonous breath of the woman who had just been led out in handcuffs. The tears on her cheeks had not yet dried, before new ones welled up from the trembling breaths she could not control. Brandon sat beside her, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel she was no longer alone. He looked at her for a long time, and for the first time, he understood what it meant for fear to dig so deep it became part of a person's very bones. Not ordinary fear, but the kind that lasts so long it becomes a way of surviving a reflex that never allows the heart to rest. Lauren Brandon said softly, so gently, it felt like a whisper against glass. But she still flinched. "Are you okay?" The question meant almost nothing to someone who had just confronted the person who tried to kill her. But Lauren still nodded instinctively, like someone who had spent years pretending she was fine so she would not trouble anyone. Brandon's chest tightened. He spoke again slowly. "You do not have to be strong. Not right now." Something in Lauren's eyes shifted. He saw pain, shame, and a depth of despair he had never known existed. "I am not strong," she whispered, so faint he almost missed it. "I am just what is left of me." Brandon's breath caught. He did not know what to say, but it did not matter, because Lauren began speaking words she had buried in the darkest corners of her memory for 3 long years. "I thought if I left things would get better," she said, staring at her pale hands. "I thought I was the problem, that I was putting you and Evan in danger. I thought if I disappeared, everything would be safe again." Brandon tightened his fists. "Without you was the greatest pain of my life." Lauren did not respond. Then she gave a small, brittle smile, a smile as thin as paper. "I imagined everything. I imagined you hated me. I imagined Evan forgot me. I imagined her voice cracked that without me, you two would be happier." Lauren Brandon said, almost pleading, "You could not truly believe that." "But I did," she said, looking at him with heartbreaking honesty. "I believed it so much I had to remind myself every day that leaving was the only way to protect you." Brandon inhaled deeply, struggling not to collapse under the weight of her words. Before he could speak, small footsteps echoed from the stairs. Evan appeared, rubbing his eyes, hair tousled from sleep, his face lighting up when he saw his father. "Dad?" he asked sleepily. "What was all that noise?" Brandon hurried to him. "Nothing, buddy." "Why are you awake? I am thirsty," Evan said, glancing at Lauren. "Is she still here?" Lauren froze her hands, twisting together until the knuckles turned white. Brandon nodded. "Yes." "Miss Lauren is staying with us for a while." Evan studied her for a moment, then unexpectedly asked the question that shattered the air. "Why is she scared?" Lauren opened her mouth, but no words came. She was completely silent, as if that simple question hurt more than anything else. Brandon quickly gave Evan a glass of water and walked him back upstairs. When he returned, Lauren was standing, hugging herself tightly, as if trying to stop her body from falling apart. "You see," she gasped, "I cannot even talk to my own son. I do not know how to be a mother anymore." Brandon stepped closer. "You will learn. We will learn together." "No," Lauren said, shaking her head as tears spilled over. "Do you know how ashamed I am? I thought if I died out there on the street, everything would be easier. Evan would grow up not knowing I ever existed." Brandon moved quickly toward her, but Lauren stepped back in fear. His hand hovered in the air, stopping just short of touching her, but his voice broke through every wall she tried to build. "Lauren, you cannot disappear again. Do you hear me? Never again." Lauren choked on her sobs. "I do not know if I can stay. Every time I look at Evan, I feel guilty. I am not worthy of being his mother. But he is worthy of having you." Brandon answered immediately, not allowing even a second of doubt. He deserves the truth. He deserves to know how fiercely you fought to protect him. He deserves to know how deeply you love him. Lauren stared at him, unsure whether she deserved to hear those words. Brandon stepped half a pace closer, his voice steady. "And I need you here." Lauren shook her head, her breath so faint Brandon had to lean in to hear her. "You do not need me. You only pity me." Brandon stopped, and for the first time, Lauren saw raw hurt in his eyes. Not anger. Pain. "Lauren," he said, voice cracking, "do you know what those 3 years were like for me? You disappeared. No message. No explanation. I thought I had failed you. I thought you did not love me anymore, but I still hoped you would come back. Every single day." Lauren felt each word strike her like a blow, shaking the foundation she had stood on for years. "I do not pity you," Brandon continued, his tone deep and trembling like the sea before a storm. "I love you. I have always loved you, even when you were gone, even when you were hurting so badly. You pushed yourself into darkness. I still loved you." Lauren's strength crumpled. She grabbed the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. Her breath hitched, then broke into a sob that tore through her chest. "Brandon, I do not know if I can ever be who I was." "You do not have to be who you were," Brandon said, stepping close enough for their breaths to meet. "You just have to stay. With me. With Evan. Step by step." Day by day, Lauren closed her eyes, and in that moment, Brandon saw her shoulders relax just a little. Not fully. Not completely. But enough. It was a tiny victory, but for Lauren, it was a battle won. Brandon looked at her, his heart aching with more than love, with the realization that she needed more than safety. She needed a place her heart could return to after 3 years of wandering through fear. He would be that place. And when Lauren opened her eyes, they were still filled with pain, but no longer empty. "Brandon," she whispered like a fragile breeze, "I will try." Such a small sentence, almost nothing. But to him it was the most beautiful promise he had ever heard. Brandon nodded gently, as if afraid to break the moment. "I know. And I will be here. I am not going anywhere." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, a soft sound, like spring trying to push its way into winter. Lauren might not be ready to step out of the darkness yet, but for the first time she was not walking alone. In the house that had once felt cold and hollow, a small crack had formed in the wall of fear surrounding her. And sometimes just one crack is enough to let the light begin to find its way in. The following days passed, unlike any stretch of time Brandon had ever lived through. The once quiet house began filling with small sounds, the soft clink of a cup touching the table, slow footsteps in the hallway, Lauren's stifled breaths. When she tried to calm herself, Evan's light laughter echoing with every run across the floor. They were all small sounds, but to Brandon, they felt like signs of life he thought he had lost forever 3 years ago. Lauren still avoided large rooms, still flinched when cars sped by outside, still glanced behind her before entering any doorway, as if someone might be following her. But Brandon noticed something far more important. She no longer wanted to run. She stayed. She tried. And for someone who had spent 3 years running from everything that alone was a battle won. One morning when Brandon walked into the kitchen, he saw Lauren standing in front of the coffee machine. She looked small, her hand gripping the cup lightly, but shaking as if just standing there was a test of strength. "I made coffee for you," she said without turning around. Brandon froze for a heartbeat, not because of the coffee, but because that simple action meant she was trying to step back into a normal rhythm of life, even if only a little. "Thank you," he replied. Lauren turned toward him, attempting a smile, though it was faint, stitched together from fragile pieces. "I want to help you. Just a little." Brandon took the cup, and when their hands brushed, she did not pull away like before. His heart stumbled in his chest. During breakfast, Evan sat across from her without knowing who she truly was. He colored and talked about school occasionally, lifting his head to ask innocent questions. "Miss Lauren, do you know how to play Lego?" Lauren froze, her eyes widening slightly, as if she could not believe the boy was speaking to her so casually. Brandon held his breath. Finally, Lauren nodded softly. "I do know." Evan smiled as if her answer added a brighter color to his day. "Can you play with me this afternoon?" Lauren swallowed hard, her eyes glistening, but she still managed to speak. "If you want me to." Evan nodded so hard his messy hair bounced. "I want that." A single sentence from a child made Lauren's heart soften, though Brandon still saw her hands trembling. Not from fear of Kelly anymore, but from the fear of not being good enough for her own son. That afternoon, Brandon stood at the doorway watching the living room. Evan sat on the rug, sorting Lego pieces by color. Lauren sat across from him, her eyelids lowered slightly from tension, but trying to smile. "Where does this one go?" Evan asked, holding up a red block. Lauren stared at it for a moment, then pointed gently. "It looks better here." Evan placed it where she showed him, then beamed. "You are good at this." Lauren let out a small laugh, a soft, genuine sound that warmed Brandon's chest. In that instant, she was not the woman haunted by trauma. She was simply a mother learning to be with her child again. But not everything went smoothly. That night, as Brandon was washing dishes, a choked cry erupted from the living room. He rushed out to find Lauren, curled under the sofa, hands over her head, her entire body shaking as if shocked by electricity. Evan stared at her, terrified. "Dad, what is wrong with Miss Lauren?" Brandon knelt beside her. His movements slow, his voice even softer. "Lauren, it is me." "You are safe." She gasped for breath, her eyes vacant, as though trapped in the moment 3 years ago when the car came at her. "They found me, they are here." Brandon pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly enough for her to feel anchored. "No one is here," he whispered. "It is only me and Evan." It took a long time before she came out of the panic. When she opened her eyes, Evan was standing beside her, gripping Brandon's pant leg. "Does it hurt?" he asked quietly, his voice as soft as leaves brushing in the wind. Lauren looked at him with tear-reddened eyes, and Brandon saw how that moment shattered her inside. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I am so sorry, Evan." Evan stepped closer and gently touched her hand. "It is okay. I get scared of the monsters in my closet, too." Brandon let out a small, warm laugh. Evan had no idea he had just pulled Lauren out of the abyss of guilt. After the panic passed, Lauren sat still for a long time, breathing like someone learning to inhale peace for the first time. "I did not think I could live like this again," she said, when Brandon handed her a glass of water. "With people, in a home, not running." Brandon looked at her, seeing fear and hope tangled together like two clashing currents. "You deserve this life," he said. "With me. With Evan." Lauren held the glass so lightly it seemed it might break. "I am afraid I will ruin everything again." Lauren, Brandon said, "We are not rebuilding the past. We are building something new." She did not answer, but her eyes no longer drowned entirely in darkness. The next day, Brandon took her to her first therapy session with the psychologist recommended by Dr. Mitchell. Lauren didn't want to go. She stood by the door with her hand gripping her sleeve, eyes fixed on the floor. "I do not know if I can say any of it," she whispered. "I have kept it inside for so long." Brandon placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "You do not have to say everything in one day. You just have to start." When she stepped into the clinic, Brandon felt as if he was seeing the very first beam of light after a long tunnel. The session lasted nearly an hour. When Lauren came out, her eyes were red, but her steps steadier than before. Brandon did not ask her anything. She leaned against the door of the car and exhaled deeply. "I did not think I could talk, but I did. Not much, but it was something." "Something is enough," Brandon said. Lauren looked at him, her lips trembling. "You are not going to leave me, right?" Brandon met her eyes, and the answer left him instantly. "Never." When they arrived home, Evan ran out with a bright smile. "Miss Lauren, I left the Lego in the same spot for you." Lauren smiled. This time the smile was clearer, warmer, and Brandon saw in that brief moment that Lauren had taken a real step out of the darkness. Not a big step, but the first one. And sometimes one small step can change everything. But Brandon knew something Lauren did not. That night, when Richard called his voice low and urgent, "Brandon, I found something in Kelly's computer. You need to see this." Brandon tightened his grip on the phone, his chest tightening, because he knew the light had only just begun to appear, but the darkness had not left. Not at all. That night, while Lauren was reading a story to Evan in the living room, Brandon stepped quietly onto the back porch to take Richard's call. The spring night air brushed cold against his skin, but it was nothing compared to the chill in Richard's voice when he said, "Brandon, this does not end with Kelly." Brandon gripped the railing until his knuckles turned white. "What do you mean?" Richard exhaled heavily. "Kelly had an encrypted folder on her computer. I cracked it. There are a series of unsent letters all written to you." Brandon closed his eyes, fighting the wave of nausea rising in his chest. "Richard, do not tell me. There is one letter," Richard interrupted. "The only one not written to you. It is addressed to Lauren." Brandon went completely still. "Addressed to Lauren, yes." And Brandon Richard paused, as if choosing his words carefully. It looks like Kelly did not act alone. Brandon felt something tighten painfully around his heart. "What did you find a name? Someone Kelly exchanged information with. Someone constantly urging her to push forward, to hurry. Someone who had a motive to want Lauren out of the picture." Brandon heard the pounding of his heart echo in his ears. "Who?" Richard said. "Your mother." Brandon stumbled back a step, as if he had been struck in the chest. The air around him froze. "No, that is impossible." "Brandon." "I did not say she committed anything," Richard clarified. "But there are messages, discussions about Lauren being unsuitable for your family. One message saying, if she leaves his life, everything will be better. There is no proof your mother knew Kelly would go as far as attempted murder. Only that she hated Lauren." Brandon whispered. "I knew. The problem is that Kelly was already unstable. She twisted that encouragement into something far more dangerous." Brandon heard the wind hiss through the trees behind the house, but it sounded like the cracking of something deep inside him. "I will handle this," Brandon said, his voice low and heavy. "No," Richard said firmly. "Do not tell Lauren anything until you know for sure." She is fragile. Do not push her into another spiral. Brandon ended the call and stood alone in the darkness for a long moment. When he finally walked back inside, Lauren and Evan were sitting together on the floor. Lauren was smiling as Evan told her a story, a small, tender smile that lit up the whole room. When Evan ran off to get a toy, Lauren turned to Brandon. "Are you okay? You were outside a long time." Brandon answered quietly, "I am fine. Just thinking." Lauren looked at him with something he had not seen in years. Trust. "I want to talk to you," she said softly. "It is important." Brandon sat down beside her, pushing away the emotional storm still roaring inside him. Lauren turned slightly, pulling her legs close to her body as if searching for steadiness. "I read my old journal last night," she said, her hands shaking as she touched the small notebook on the table. "The pages I wrote when I still lived here, before everything happened." Brandon waited silently, and I realized something. Lauren continued. "I was not just afraid of Kelly. I was afraid of myself." "Yourself?" Brandon frowned. "Why, because I did not tell you when things first started happening," she said, guilt weighing every word. "I let fear control me. I thought you would not believe me. I let silence destroy this family." Brandon placed his hand near hers, not touching, but steady enough for her to feel him. "Lauren, you were threatened, followed, attacked. No one blames you for being afraid. You did not destroy this family. Kelly did. I know she whispered, but I still feel guilty, especially when it comes to Evan." Tears rolled down her cheeks, the kind she had refused to let herself cry for 3 long years. "I want to be his mother again. I want to stay. But I am scared." Brandon leaned in his voice, firm like a promise. "Lauren, you are not alone in this anymore. If you get stronger, bit by bit, even just a little, Evan and I will walk the rest of the road with you." It was then Lauren lifted her hand to wipe her tears, then placed that same hand over Brandon's. It was the first time she had ever been the one to reach for him. "I want to believe that," she whispered. "Give me a reason to believe it." Brandon closed his hand around hers this time, without hesitation. "I will be that reason." The upstairs door opened. Evan ran down, holding a tiny blue paper letter. "I made this for Miss Lauren," he said, offering it proudly. Lauren unfolded it. Inside, in messy child handwriting, were the words, "Do not be sad." "I like playing with you." Lauren covered her mouth as the tears streamed down her face. Evan smiled and hugged her, a small, gentle hug that broke something open inside her. When he ran off, Lauren whispered, "I think I can learn to be a mother again." Brandon placed a hand on her back, his eyes bright with the first real hope he had felt in years. Lauren leaned against his shoulder, seeking the warmth she had lost for so long, and Brandon looked past her toward the window, where darkness was settling over the trees. A darkness, thick and heavy, not easily chased away. Lauren had climbed out of hell once, but the past never releases its grip quickly, and Brandon knew that tomorrow he would face his mother. Not to accuse her, but to bury the shadow created by Kelly and by careless words that had spiraled into destruction. This would be the final battle to bring Lauren fully back into the light, and this time he would not fail. The next morning, the Denver sky was strangely calm, as if the long night had finally grown tired and stepped aside for peace. But Brandon's heart was anything but peaceful. He drove to his mother's house, every turn of the road, heavy as though he were dragging 3 years of pain behind him. When Mrs. Hayes opened the door, Brandon stood tall, yet his eyes held a disappointment she had never seen in him before. "I want to talk," he said, his voice quiet, but sharp as a needle. She led him into the living room where family photos still hung on the wall, except Lauren had been cut out of several frames. Brandon stared at those empty spaces, each one stinging like someone had erased a piece of his soul. "Mum," he began, "Kelly has been arrested." Her eyes flickered with defensiveness. She deserved it. "You owe her nothing." Brandon shook his head. "No, you do not understand. Kelly did not act alone." The room went still. Mrs. Hayes frowned. "What are you talking about?" Brandon pulled out his phone and opened the messages Richard had sent. Short lines of text appeared on the screen, cold, judgmental and cruel comments about Lauren, about Brandon's family, about how Lauren was supposedly unsuitable and should leave so Brandon could have a better life. Mrs. Hayes paled her lips, trembling. You think I forced Kelly to hurt Lauren?" Brandon answered directly, without hesitation. "But you helped her with your words." Mrs. Hayes stepped back as if slapped. "I only wanted you to be happy. Lauren was unstable. You deserved better." "No," Brandon said, his voice cracking with hurt. "Lauren was my choice, and you made her believe she did not deserve to be loved. You planted fear in her, and Kelly turned it into something insane." Mrs. Hayes held her head in her hands as tears spilled down her cheeks. "I never knew she would go that far, but Lauren paid the price." Brandon continued with 3 years of living in terror, 3 years of losing her child, her family, and herself. And it all began because you never accepted her. Mrs. Hayes collapsed into a chair, her shoulders shaking. "Brandon, I was wrong." Brandon sat beside her, touching her hand for the first time in the conversation. "I am not here to blame you. I am here because I need your help to heal what broke. You need to apologize to Lauren." Mrs. Hayes lifted her tearful eyes. "I do not know if she will forgive me." "That does not matter," Brandon said. "What matters is that you try." When Brandon returned home, Lauren was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a thin blanket. The soft sunlight reflected off her hair, making her look both fragile and radiant. She looked at him and immediately sensed something. "You spoke to her, didn't you?" Brandon sat beside her and told her everything. When he finished, Lauren stayed silent for a long time. Her eyes held no resentment, only the exhaustion of someone whose old wound had been reopened, but finally revealed its source. "I always thought she hated me," Lauren whispered. "But I never imagined her words made Kelly believe she had the right to destroy me." Brandon gently squeezed her hand. "Kelly had her own sickness. But my mother, she truly never imagined the consequences." Lauren looked down at her intertwined fingers. "She wants to see me. She does," Brandon said. "But I will not let you face her, unless you are ready." Lauren inhaled deeply, then exhaled. "No, I want to see her." The meeting took place in the living room. When Mrs. Hayes walked in, Lauren stood, her hands trembling slightly. Mrs. Hayes stopped for a moment before speaking. "Lauren, I am sorry." Lauren looked at her. Her eyes no longer held fear, but depth and maturity, earned through suffering. "For a long time, I believed I was not good enough for Brandon and Evan," Lauren said. "I believed that if I disappeared, their lives would be better." Mrs. Hayes broke down. "No, Lauren, I was wrong. I judged you through my own expectations, instead of your true worth. And you hurt Brandon, and hurt my own grandson." Lauren nodded, tears falling quietly. "Thank you for saying that." In that moment, no one reached out for an embrace. There was no perfect reconciliation, but there was a nod, and for Lauren, That was enough to set down one of the heaviest burdens of her life. That night after Evan fell asleep, Lauren stepped out onto the back porch where Brandon stood under the pale moonlight. She approached him and wrapped her arms around him from behind. "Brandon," she whispered, "I still have fear, but I also have hope, and that is because of you." Brandon turned, placing his hand on her cheek. "We cannot change the 3 years we lost, but we can start from today." Lauren nodded softly. "I choose today." They stood there beneath the quiet sky, the first peaceful night after so many storms, and Lauren knew she would not run anymore. She would stay. She belonged here. If you believe that no matter the pain, people can still find their way back to love, leave a small comment to help spread that hope even further. From the perspective of a specialist in human psychology and trauma recovery, the journey of Lauren and Brandon reveals a profound truth. Not every wound can be seen with the eyes, and not every pain can be easily named. But when a person finds a safe place to return to, when they find someone patient enough to walk beside them, even the darkest memories can slowly begin to heal. What matters is not that they return to who they once were, but that they choose to keep moving forward, even if they tremble, even if they go slowly, even if fear still follows every step. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe so we can bring more human and powerful journeys like this to you. And before you go, comment the phrase "Stay here" as a reminder that sometimes the greatest courage is choosing to stay and love one more time.